In today's video, I'm going to be discussing a very common mistake made at beginner to intermediate levels, which is misevaluating opponents' attacks and resources, or what I like to call seeing ghosts. Enjoy the video. Okay, today we're going to be talking about a very common mistake that I see beginners and intermediate players make, which is evaluating real versus fake threats. So for example, in this position, a lot of people would feel uncomfortable here with the black pieces. Why? Because the H file is open, this line to the black king is open, the rook is on H1, the queen is on H4, and these two pieces are barreling down the H file. However, what you have to realize is that if you simply move the rook away, and let's say we move it to b8 because that's the best square, we're trying to attack the white king also, there's actually no threat on the H file, because after queen H7 check, we just move the king. You just tuck the king away, and this is a very nice defensive pattern that is very effective. So in this position, even if knight to g5 or a move like this is played, once again, this is not a real threat. It does not threaten anything. Nothing is being attacked here. You just continue attacking with a4, and your attack is actually very real, while white's attack is not real at all. So in this position, let's say a move like rook to a1, you would just simply be winning here if this exchange happens. So what white has to do is actually play a3 and try to keep the position locked down. So remember, whenever there are pieces like this lining up on the H file and you have a fianchettoed bishop, your opponent first has to get rid of this bishop, which is the key defender of your king, and then he can attack you. But if the pieces are set up like this and you cannot get rid of this bishop with the white pieces, you have no attack, simply. And I see a lot of players in these types of positions freak out and assume that they're losing and actually make losing mistakes. For example, if you were to play a move like f5, now you run into trouble. Now you run into trouble because there's queen h7, there's knight g5. You might lose this bishop. Even if you don't lose this bishop, something is going to die here because queen takes g6 is a move. If you go queen f6, let's say there's e takes f5, that your king is on f6, the position is opening up. So this is an extremely dangerous position for the black pieces. There's even rook h6, and then you have to take this knight, and then you get checkmated with rook g6. If you take the rook, of course, there's queen takes. There's even queen takes h6. I was going to say there's queen takes b7, but there's also just takes here, and then you come back to g7, and then you win the queen. So here, black is definitely losing. However, if we go back and if we simply move our rook away, there's no threat here. We don't need to touch any of our pawns. We don't need to touch the bishop. White just gives a check and we move the king away. So when you're in a situation like this, remember this defensive idea and remember this pattern. Now let's take a look at this position, and this position is actually from one of my bullet games, and here my opponent had these two pieces on the H file trying to checkmate me on H2. However, in this position, there are exactly 4 winning moves for the white pieces. Every other move either draws the game or loses the game. So in this position, the 4 winning moves are rook f to e1, rook f to d1, rook f to c1, and rook f to b1. Basically, what that means is that you just move the rook and you win. Because let's say rook to e1, which is what I played in the game. If queen h2 is ever played, once again, we have this fianchettoed bishop. We just simply move the king away and there is no threat here. This square is covered so many times. Even if a move like, let's say, knight to g4 is played, there's nothing here. You don't have to worry about a thing in the world. You can even start opening up the center with moves like e4, trying to get to the black king. This is a completely winning position for the white pieces. And once again, this pattern right here with the bishop being on g2, you have to get rid of this bishop in order to create an attack on the white king. In this case, even if you get rid of this bishop, it's not going to be enough because there are so many pieces around. But you have to keep in mind that there's no attack here. You don't have to panic when you're in a situation like this. Move the rook away, queen h2, you move the king away, and there is no danger here. Okay, now let's take a look at this position right here. It's white to play. White plays this move rook to d1, and you're being asked the question with the black pieces. Do you go to e7 to maintain the protection of this knight and not double your pawns? Or do you go to b6, which is more active? However, this allows white to take on f6, and now your pawns are doubled. The g file is open, the diagonal over here is open, and your king might be slightly weak. Well, believe it or not, the correct decision here is to actually go to b6. This is the correct move. However, a lot of players here would start seeing ghosts, and they would play a move like queen e7, which is technically a little bit more solid than queen b6. However, you're also less active, and this is what matters most. In this position, white can start an attack with a move like g4 and then g5, and after a couple of moves, what I want you to notice is that white gets a very active position with a semi-open g-file. This pin is very annoying. You don't have any useful squares with the queen, any useful moves, I should say. You cannot go to d6 because the queen will be taken, and you're not posing any problems to the white king, and this position is very passive because of that. However, if you were to actually be a bit more brave, and if you were to calculate concretely, you would realize that after queen b6, you're totally fine in this position. Yes, white can give you a check. Yes, white can give you another check. However, you can block it, and if the rook is taken in the corner, the queen actually gets trapped. So whenever you see ideas like this, queen to g4, the queen was on a4, queen g4, and then queen e4, you have to follow up with concrete calculations. Just thinking about ideas, oh, my king is open, oh, there are open diagonals here. Thinking about general ideas is not going to be enough. You have to calculate concretely. Yes, the g file is open. Yes, the diagonal is open. But is there any threat? Is the rook actually hanging? Am I fast enough with the counterplay? Because in this position, white is threatening g4, but are you fast enough with the counterplay? And the answer is yes, because after knight to c6, knight d4, captures, and after g takes f5, you have d3. So actually, you're the one that's attacking here and not white. White only moved his queen so many times. This is undeveloped. The rook is also undeveloped. This rook is developed, but it's actually not that useful right now because of this pawn, and this is a completely winning position for the black pieces. This is a devastating attack, and in a couple of moves, the white king is not going to be feeling safe at all. So in this position, you would capture on f5, you open up the e file, and you're the one that's attacking. So you have to be very concrete in your calculation, and you always have to ask yourself, okay, am I in any danger because there are doubled f-pawns, because the g file is open? Is there any actual danger here, or am I seeing ghosts? Okay, now let's take a look at this position right here, and this is a game that was played between Bobby Fischer with the white pieces versus Oscar Pano with black, and in this position, Fischer played this move g4. Now, once again, a lot of players here would assume that because you're pushing the pawns in front of your king, you're actually weakening your king, but that's not exactly the case. You have to look at the position as a whole and not just this one pawn move, and not be very fixed on these ideas like, okay, I don't want to push pawns in front of my king. The thing is, here you have pawns on d4 and e5, you have more space on this side of the board, and you have like a gazillion pieces over here which are going to be protecting your king. Your king is not going to be in any danger, and by pushing this pawn, you gain control over f5, so the knight cannot go there. You gain control over h5, so it's harder to push h5 for black, and also you gain the square on g3. Now this knight that is very passive on e2 can jump to g3, and then you can start an attack with h4, h5. So you have to be very concrete. Once again, you cannot generalize ideas like, I don't want to push pawns in front of my king, because in this case, you should push pawns in front of your king because it will give you control over crucial squares. squares, and it will give you a very nice position if you do so. And what happened in this game is exactly that. Fischer went on to create a devastating attack. I'm not going to cover the entire game, but what happened was that after a couple of moves, h5 was played, knight to g5, attacking this pawn, and then a brilliant move, bishop to e4. The bishop cannot be taken because after knight takes, you are going to get checkmated here with knight to f6. This is going to be a devastating attack, and if the bishop is not taken, which it wasn't taken in the actual game, you will have lots of tactics and you will go into a winning position. So this is how the game went. I'm not going to cover the entire thing. I actually have a video on this channel already covering this game, so you guys can check that out if you want to. But Fischer went on to win this game. It just goes to show you that you don't want to be seeing ghosts like this. Oh, I can't play g4 because I'm pushing pawns in front of my king. My king is not going to be safe. But your king is completely safe, and actually the black king is the one that is in danger. When we teach beginners chess, we tell them to castle as soon as possible to develop your pieces and castle. However, as you become more advanced, you need to start realizing when castling is actually not that great of a move, when you should actually keep the king in the center, and when the king is actually safer in the center than when you castle. So in a position like this, if you were to make this move castles, what would happen here is that black will play knight to e8, and then black will play f5, and black will attempt to start an attack on your king. However, you don't have to castle here. In this position, castling is not a good move. You have to take a look at the pawn structure. So the pawn chain is going this way and also this way. So that means that black's plans here are to execute a6 and b5, or to execute f5 after moving this knight away. These are both ways that black can open up his pieces and create an attack on the queen side or on the king side. So a very powerful move in this position, instead of castles, is to actually keep the king in the center and play this move g4, controlling f5. Because now if black moves knight to e8, what happens is that you will simply continue to develop. You will restrict the other pawn break as well. Let's say black plays f5 anyways, trying to open up his pieces. No problem. You open up the g file for your pieces, and you're going to be very, very active here. And you can even castle at an opportune moment. Not kingside though, mind you. In this position, you would actually castle queenside after a couple of moves. Like let's say in a position like this, you are going to be able to castle queenside and create an attack on the black king. And this is 18 moves in. So you don't have to castle too early if the center is closed, and you have to keep this idea in mind, because if the center is closed, you have to look at the pawn structure. Where are black's main pawn breaks? Main pawn breaks for black are b5 and f5. Let's try to restrict those instead of just simply castling and running into them willingly, because if we run into them willingly, okay, then black is going to get a very nice active position. It's not winning for black right away, but it is definitely better than the alternative. So stop seeing ghosts and actually keep the king in the center where it is safer. Let me show you yet another example of keeping the king in the center. And in a position like this, yes, you can castle kingside, but why castle kingside when you can keep the king in the center where it is completely safe? Because once again, the center is closed, and if anything, we can start fighting back in this position with a move like g5, g4, and then we would remove the defender of this d4 pawn. This is a very powerful idea. If white ever plays a move like h3, we can even go h5. This pawn cannot be taken. Well, technically it can be taken, but the problem is it should not be taken, because then you lose this knight here. So if you take this pawn, you have to take it with the bishop. However, what's the downside of taking this pawn with the bishop? You lose the defender of the d4 pawn. So after bishop takes, knight takes, you will lose this pawn on d4, and you've just lost a very powerful central pawn, while black gets a semi-open g file now towards the white king. So this trade was beneficial for the black pieces. Now this doesn't mean that you're completely winning here, but it does mean that you have a very pleasant game. And in this position, you can even castle queenside in a lot of these lines. For example, even all the way back here, you can castle queenside, and this is going to be a very pleasant position because there's no rook c1 here. You just move the king away and there's no threat on the black king, while you actually have very tangible threats with h5 and g4. So this is extremely dangerous for white. White is actually much worse. So make sure you don't see any ghosts. Let me just go back to this position. Evaluate the positions correctly. So in this position, the center is locked. So my king is safe here, at least temporarily. If I go to the king side, let me just go all the way back here. If I go to the king side, there can be a potential attack and I have to play positionally. If I castle queenside though, now I can fight back on this side of the board and I can get a very active position. My king is totally safe on b8, while the white king is a little bit less safe on g1. So this is going to be a very comfortable game for the black pieces. And finally, let's take a look at this position right now. So when we look at this position, it is actually black to move. If it was white to move, what would white play here? And I'm sure a lot of you guys can find the move here for white. It's h5. Of course, if I just make a random move with the black pieces, white goes h5, white will open up the h file and white will try to attack the black king. So a move that we can play to actually defend against this idea is to play h5 ourselves, and this is the best move in this position. And once again, a lot of players here would misevaluate this move and think that they're actually in a lot of danger because they played this move h5, which pushes the pawn in front of your king. But there's absolutely nothing here. If takes, you go knight takes h5, you have a nice blockade on this h5 square. This is a very nice position for this knight. And if white pushes g5 instead, okay, fine, you just move the knight back and now this position has closed down, so it won't open up and you're going to be comfortable here with black. It's not winning or anything, but it is comfortable because you're not getting attacked anymore. So you have to be very careful and you have to evaluate moves like this correctly. h5 is a very important defensive resource, and once you realize that you have this move, you will realize that there's no attack here for white, and actually if there are any threats on this knight or on your king, they are all ghost threats. They don't exist. Your king is completely safe here. Even if a move like f4 is played, that's not going to cut it because there's a knight to g3. Let's say a rook to h2. You will take here and then you take on e4. So you win a pawn here and your bishop is going to open up. If your opponent keeps attacking you, fine. You will also continue to attack here. The problem is the black king is in the center. The center is opening up now and your opponent is going to be in a lot of danger here because this is going to be very dangerous. You can take on c3. It's actually better to take on e3 first, and now you are up a piece and you have a devastating attack on the white king because everything is very loose and very weak. You don't want to go to f2 right away, but there are some potential ideas here while you are very safe as the black pieces. The rook is doing a great job of defending the 7th rank. The bishop is doing a great job of attacking and defending the king at the same time, and this is a completely winning position for the black pieces. So any threat that exists in this position for white after h5, if they take on h5, those are not threats anymore. They are ghost threats because your position is getting very active and you're going to be much better here. So remember this defensive resource of playing h5 to stop a pawn storm, and do not make the mistake of allowing h5, which will allow an attack on your king. If you are able to stop h5, you can stop this attack. But the problem is, since we can play h5, your king is completely safe and you don't have to be worried. You don't have to worry about phantom attacks here because your king is actually completely safe.